Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September 14th edition of the SIG Network meeting. As usual, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which effectively boils down to be nice to one another, so please do be nice to one another. If you can, when you want to interject, ask questions and stuff like that, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, as that's very helpful for us to prioritize and kind of keep things moving. We have a very light agenda for today. It is an open agenda, so if you want to add something after the last agenda item, that would be fine. If for some reason we add like 10 all of a sudden, any that we don't get to, we can flood over, but I doubt that'll happen. And we'll start off with triage. So I've already opened in order, oldest to newest, all of the unassigned triage issues, including this one that was a reopen. Nodes behind NAT not starting. Which, Tim, it looks like you were the last one to look at, but it was so long ago. It was like half a decade ago, and it's been reopened. Let's see.
What
So let's look at
cube version was it filed against?
2017, so it's what, 6 years, 9 or 12 releases, probably 10 releases ago.
And they say they're able to work around it by setting the node IP to kubelet. If you go up a little bit.
Right here.
Which, I mean, yeah, that one. That is how you do it, right?
And then at the end he says, however, I feel is weird and I'd like to see this issue be revisited again. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So
okay.
Perhaps we can ask him if he'd be interested in working on it himself.
But like, what would you? I mean, is there actually a bug here where kubelet is ignoring an IP it is given that is not on interfaces?
Right.
Maybe.
I don't know off the top of my head. I doubt Tim remembers. It's half a decade ago.
I mean, I remember looking at the issue and going, wow, that's not really one we planned for. And then it went away, and like so many issues here, whoever filed it got satisfied enough that they didn't bother following up, and it aged out, is what it looks like. Yep, exactly. Fedabot.
Okay.
It's not that I'm saying like, no, we don't want to solve this. It is, I'm gonna have to go refresh myself on the details of it. When a PR says disable validation, it makes me scared right away.
I mean, is the public IP even known here? I mean, I see it has a variable for it, but so I should assume that at least it's known when doing this, or is it natted on the outside somewhere?
Also a good question. I thought it was known, if I remember.
Yeah, it's known. The problem is just that kubelet refuses to let you set node IP to an IP that isn't actually.
I see a variable called public IP, right? But I don't really see ever saying what it is. Not that it really matters, but
yeah, I think he just doesn't want to put his public IP into the bug report.
Okay.
In any case, seems like a real bug.
Yeah, seems like there may actually be an issue that we could potentially fix up. Does anybody particularly want to triage this one forward?
But it's sort of weird. If you have a public IP, then it's probably sitting on an interface, and it's adding it to the interface as some sort of fix, which to me seems like this public IP is on the outside of the system at all. Otherwise, it should be there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we can just accept it, but I'm kind of thinking maybe there's a little bit more triage here to do to tease out.
The problem is if we accept it, we're saying we agree
we're saying we're going to do it.
Well, I mean, we're saying that we would accept it if somebody does do it, and I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm not sure it's not. I'm just not sure that it is. He's saying adding the public IP adder is weird, which I agree. And like the GCE environment has a 1-to-1 NAT for public IPs too.
So maybe it's not something we can figure out synchronously right now, but we need to take some time to think about. So if anybody wants to do that, just you don't have to commit to like anything other than just trying to tease it out a little bit further, and we get to a point where we want to maybe not accept it. If not, I'll just do it. I'll take it on and like kind of talk with you, Tim, and we can kind of figure it out asynchronously.
Yeah, I'll leave it open to think about it. I hadn't looked at it yet this week. So.
I'm going to ask the question if the public IP is known on the node or is natted on the outside and you just have some other way of getting it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
if it's dynamic, that's an entirely different proposition.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind asking some questions and getting some clarification in here, we'd appreciate it.
Cool, thanks, Per. It is an interesting case for a node behind a NAT to register to a master that is on the other side of the NAT. And like, how important is node IP? We do a lot of validation of node IP. How much is it actually used for anymore? Dan, I know you've spent a ton of time there.
So I was going to say first, there is also another ancient issue somewhere about it should be possible to register an external IP for like in the kubelet args, which might also help this person. What is node IP actually used for? So I think a lot of CNI plugins use it. Is one thing. For instance, for tunneling packets to other nodes, they use the published node IP of the node.
But you
node
mean
IP
like
is
node spec
IP?
addresses, right?
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say, Tim?
So if that's the case, then setting node IP to the NATed address would go out their private network and back in order to go node to node.
Yep.
I know we use it in things like describe or get service, the endpoints for a host, for host pods, right? We set the host IP there.
Yes, host network pods will have a pod IP that is the node's node IP.
Interesting. Okay, so that would suggest that calling it the node IP is actually really not a great idea. I mean, it seems like the wrong semantic to me to go outside.
Yeah, maybe the question here is, why do you want to do this? Because, there might be something simpler that this person wants.
Indeed, and they did have this other one that it's not labeled SIG Network yet, but Antonio talked to them a little bit about it, and it looks like just asking for clarifications. So I'll try to follow up and see if we can get some clarifications here. I appreciate anybody who can drop some comments with some questions for clarifications, and we'll see if we want to move forward on this one or not.
I think this is one of those dirty corners that nobody has really wanted to try to sweep up, this whole node addresses stuff. And Dan has done a lot of work there, but the dirt is pretty deep.
Roger that.
I mean, it's not necessarily unreasonable that you might want to have, I think, what we used to call a stretch cluster in OpenShift, where you've got like a node way over there somewhere and a node over here and somewhere in the middle. Of course, you've got issues with latency between those nodes, but assuming that latency is not a problem, you could have those nodes in different places and they could be natted. And so
the problem is that the node addresses started with assumption that everything was in a flat network space, and then that turned out to not be true. And we've sort of chipped away at this idea of like split horizon addressing. The address you get depends on where you're coming from, but we've done a really poor job of sort of drawing it that way.
Well, what people typically do, I think, is have some kind of tunnel between the two locations where you can always use the internal address for the node. I think what's different here is that, they want to use the public NAT IP instead. So that's weird.
With NAT and firewalling, you end up to hole punching, right? So, I mean, this whole idea that you can reach all the ports on that address and expect to end up in the same state, it's like, it's not there. When you
like how are you going to do node port?
A tunnel, absolutely. Or if you have a more like a static NAT with the absolute port forwarding, yes, but I mean that's not very common.
No. And we know through things like the connectivity that, you know, control plane back to nodes is not assumed to be connected anyway, right?
Yeah.
Or rather, that assumption proved problematic, so many people have spent a lot of time breaking it. Okay, let's move on.
I'll write later and ask the questions, because if you can make a picture, then it's easy to understand. I still, where is the NAT? Where is that address? I think it's on the outside. I think that's what it's saying. And it's not on the node itself. It happened on the outside. And then it's really up to the service that sets up what you can expect. And then when you know what you can expect, well, then you can use maybe some tricks. If you have a really static mapping that is just aliasing it. I mean, doing a simple the DNS NAT on the way in and out. But,
you know what? As I'm rereading the original bug report, it says specifically it exposes a private IP which is not routable from a master.
Exactly.
Which, yes, that is true, that there can be nodes which are registered with IPs that are not routable from a master. That's why we have this RPC connectivity API. Like, maybe the answer here is actually you need to implement a connectivity plugin that understands how to reach from the control plane back to the nodes. Even if it's just a simple, like, extract the DNS name from a different field and talk to that instead. Right? Like, we had the SSH implementation, we have the new agent connectivity implementation, we have a flat implementation. Maybe this is a different sort of flat but DNS implementation. Cool. I'll respond to that effect too. Let's move on. Sorry.
Sounds good. No worries.
Nerd
I'm going to kind of gloss over this. No, that's good. I'm going to kind of gloss over this one because Windows is kind of moving it along and it's Windows specific. But we can come back to it if they need our help. How to manually disable IPv6 when I use
why would anyone ever want to do that?
Well,
no, it's like just kidding. IPv6 is what I do day in and day out.
Yeah, I know.
If you do this, Per will find you and be unkind to you in violation of Kubernetes rules.
You're moving backwards, not forwards. What are you doing? Wants a way to disable IPv6. Did anybody respond to this one yet?
Last comment is works for me, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't pick up on that. Cool. All right. I'll grab this one then. It probably just needs to be closed.
What is it that works for them?
Don't use
changing
the
their QB.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I was just answering, changing the KubeADM configuration.
Yeah, there's a configuration option to do what they're trying to do.
Passing bind address. Okay.
Right here. Yeah.
I was going to say we have a flag for that. Cool.
Yep. So they're probably taken care of. I'll double read it just to make sure there's nothing missing in the minutia of it, but it's probably just closed done. Job constantly failing on replica set and replication controller tests. This is just Antonio reporting a problem with our tests. Let's see where he left off with it. The fix is in that one. So this is accepted. This is being worked on. Oh, it's done. So does this just need to be closed?
Sounds like it.
Okay, I'll double check that one too. And maybe that one's done. These are great ones. I love this kind of triage. Everything's done or all right. Umbrella issue. Oh, I remember this one. Jay just made this one the other day. There's been a lot of conversation on this. So the TLDR for this one, there are many moving parts and K8s clusters that may use or depend on these annotations, tates, and in ambiguous ad hoc sort of ways. This makes it confusing for users and vendors to know when they should or shouldn't manipulate the values of such. I don't know if there's any way we will. Does anybody have anything to add to this? There's been a lot of discussion asynchronously. I don't know if there's anything worth adding synchronously.
Yeah, I would say people should read the discussion if they want, but
Yeah, we can check back in on this one in the coming meeting in 2 weeks and see if it's not moving, if there's anything we can do to kind of shepherd it forward. But I think right now it's just an async conversation mode. And if you're interested, please do join into the conversation here. Leaving network policy, connection-oriented semantics are undocumented. It's undocumented that network policy rules, go ahead.
Yeah, this is basically, I guess we should accept it. The docs are not totally explicit on the fact that network policy applies to connections rather than packets, and it's currently not clear that it only applies to connections made after you define the network policy, which I don't know, if we want to make that explicit or not, but
Should probably be left implementation defined, but you should never assume that it affects previous connections. Same thing that you shouldn't assume that connections can continue if you stop them, right?
Yeah, my concern with documenting it as connection oriented, I mean, I think we did discuss this way back in the day when we were first talking about network policy, which, as an aside, I have an interesting memory pin on that one because I remember sitting in line to get into Star Wars The Force Awakens working on network policy design docs. So I was at the mall sitting on the floor. So like in my memory, there's like one thing that pins it to a timeline. That's how long ago it was. I remember discussing whether we would consider it invalid for an implementation to be packet oriented instead of connection oriented. If an implementation chose, hey, there's a new policy, I'm going to break that TCP connection, is that wrong or is that acceptable?
so I think that is undefined. The part that is not undefined is that if you say pod A can talk to pod B, that implies that reply packets from pod B to pod A are also allowed.
Well, in that case, I think we should make it implementation defined. Because undefined means that you can never say, right? But for the implementation, you should be able to give an answer to that.
Agree. So yes, reply packets should be implicitly allowed, and connection versus packet is implementation defined. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So we accept it. Is somebody going to go and update docs? Volunteers?
I can take it.
Thank you, sir. All right.
And just to make sure I understood it correctly, the decision was that the reply packets are implicitly allowed, but the connection oriented versus being packet oriented is an implementation defined detail, right?
So I wouldn't call that connection versus packet oriented, because I feel like that's what the reply packet thing is about. It's not defined what happens when the policy rules change when there are already open connections. It's not defined whether they get broken or not.
Got it. Okay.
Well, implementation defined would mean that an implementation needs to specify what happens. If it's undefined, then it's always undefined, right? And you don't know. So I would say that it should be implementation defined. It's up to each implementation to specify what happens.
Right. It's an important distinction, and implementations can make different trade-offs based on that.
Cool. Thanks again, Suri. Thanks everybody for the conversation on that one, helping move that one forward. Okay, so I think Rob's just not here, so we dropped the one that he was going to talk about. Antonio had a slot for something, but he's not here either, so I don't think he has anything to talk about. So Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought it might be useful to come back around to this one. The meeting agenda doc is and has been for geez, 8 years on my personal Gmail account as the owner. I know we've talked in the past about moving this to a more official location. That didn't happen. So does anybody know what other teams are using for agenda and stuff like that? I think at one point we discussed trying to move ownership of the document to some other official Cube account, but I don't think that panned out for various reasons. You know, if nobody knows anything off the top of their head, I can go ask other teams what they do and we can figure something out.
Yeah, no objections to getting it off your personal thing. We do have the Kubernetes.io domain through Google, so we should be able to open a doc under that domain, but we don't hand out accounts on that domain. So like none of us have an @Kubernetes.io email or something. So we would need to talk to, God, I don't even know who owns that domain now. Somebody in Kate's Infra will know. Maybe Arnaud or Ben will have an idea. And the small number of people who actually have domain accounts should be able to create a doc for us. Now, I don't know if that's the done thing or not, but I would imagine it probably should be. And then they can add us all as owners of the doc.
Okay. I mean, that's a good place to start. So thanks. I'll go track that down.
Okay. Thank you for taking that on. Appreciate that. All right. If nothing else, anybody, you can take a couple seconds, and if anybody has any last minute thing that they want to say, go ahead. Otherwise, we can give everybody back a half hour extra time today.
We need to see if Lars' microphone is still making the more sounds.
Yeah, at the beginning it
can
was.
you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yay!
We
It's
do.
working.
Yeah, thanks. I switched from Chrome to the actual application for Zoom, and it seemed to do the trick.
Weird.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, very weird.
Okay. I didn't prep for today to do like KEP reviews, but we need to do that. So maybe we'll put that on the agenda for 2 weeks from now and figure out what KEPs we want to push again and what else is going through. Just run through the dashboard and make sure that we're making progress where we want to be.
Sounds good. Do that next time. I don't know, just since we're here, my one last thing is today's the last day or tomorrow to do a contributor summit CFP. It's just a Google form. It's really basic. So if you have anything that you want to bring to the contributor summit, one last day to put that in, please do. I love the contributor summit. I'd love to see tons of talks there, especially SIG Network talks. So.
And especially, let me echo that completely. I love the talks that are like the reality of working within a SIG and how we made it work for us. KEPs can be unpleasant. People who write KEPs or review KEPs talk about what we do to make that less terrible. I proposed a talk on using debuggers because I keep seeing people with printfs, and I love me some debugger, and I realize not everybody knows how to use it. All sorts of talks are welcome. So please, if you are planning to be in
looked at a tool called Undo?
No.
So we should push them to get it working with Go. It's a very cool tool. I mean, I've seen it for C++ and so on and discussed getting it for Go. It basically makes it possible to go to any time in the process lifetime with the memory as it was. And then you can see all transactions back and forth. So if we can get them to support for use in Kubernetes, that would be quite cool. The guy that founded it has left, but it's a very cool tool.
Interesting. I've been using Delve.
Delve rocks.
A few years ago, it was pretty crappy, and I think a lot of people wrote it off. But more recently, it's actually gotten pretty darn good. And when I'm trying to take apart something that I just can't figure out, where is it going, jumping through some interface definition that I then lose track of, like the prisoner running across the river, the bloodhound loses the scent. But the debugger can just illuminates everything.
Yeah, that'd be a good
and
talk.
I see how many people don't use the debugger. So I just propose that as a short talk of like, look, here's the real basics of using Delve.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, because I did GDB forever, and then I
Yep.
went to LLDB, and I do that for Rust. But Delve is great because, like in Rust, if you use like some async framework, it's a mess with LLDB. But Delve gives you like all that Go routine awareness, which just makes everything so much easier.
Delve, you say? And that's something I never.
DLV
Yeah.
is the command line, but yeah,
DLV.
Delve. Yeah, it's really good. I've been using that for
And
a long
it
time
handles the
now.
coroutines in the correct way.
Sorry.
I didn't hear what you said.
It handles the coroutines and all that stuff
Yeah.
in the correct way.
And
All
you
the
can switch
Yeah, you can-
between. You can jump
Very
between them. It's
cool.
great.
Very cool.
Yes. But even that's true, but I would call that like 200 level usage, like even 100 level usage of just being able to step up and down through the stack and see what's going on and inspect your variables, like is so useful. And so many people still don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Dan had one more last minute thing he put in the Zoom chat. Just to call out, if people could please help move KEP 3866 kubeproxy NF tables mode forward. It needs more review, please.
I don't even know if it needs more reviews. I think it's ready to merge as implementable, but so I guess it needs approval.
Roger that. You said please review, so yeah, it needs a poke. Like sounds good. All right. We'll give everybody back 29 minutes. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next time. Cheers.